everyone. I'm Hal Levy with PYMNTS.com. I'm joined today by Mark Staunton, who is the head of customer success with North America at Form 3. Welcome. We're happy to have you.
Hi, Hal. Great to meet you.
Great to be with you. We're discussing today the shift that is underway and certainly in the future going to be there away from batch payments toward real-time payments. It's a significant opportunity. It's also got its share of challenges, so we'll be discussing both. Let's get started with this sort of 10,000-foot view. If we're looking at what the pain points are that are in place, as banks are examining the infrastructure they have in place to deal with payments and then to deal with things in the back end, I'd love to get your thoughts. What's not working when we think about legacy operations? At the same time, some things are working and don't necessarily need to be overhauled. Tell me your thoughts there.
Certainly. So, the traditional payment rails, the single high value transactions or the bulk batch low value transactions, they've evolved over a long time, right? They've been in place many, many years. So they've come to, I suppose, achieve a certain efficiency around those requirements, and there's been lots of effort to make better tooling and improve the process insofar as it can be improved. But ultimately, the core restriction is you have to swap files, you have to send bulks of payments together, because the technology ultimately at the central infrastructures hasn't been able to manage the volume of payments on a one-by-one basis, right? So, so the legacy infrastructures around the batch process, I would say, are relatively fit for purpose for a lot of use cases. Paying monthly salaries, the date that's coming up, you can prepare everything in advance, and that process is quite well embedded when it works. And then you get the unhappy path where you need to change someone's account details, or someone has left the firm and you don't want to pay them that month. How do you pick that single transaction out of your bulk batch process? What's the risk and control framework around that? How do you then manage your resulting reconciliations? Do you have a break between your bulk debit at the bank versus your records internally? And that brings a lot of manual overhead and processing into the cleanup from that. Coupled with that, you are passing bulky files around. You have to make certain cutoff times at certain points of the day, or you miss the next settlement cycle. So there are these inherent limitations that really can't be overcome, that the world of immediate payments really can address and bring better solutions to these things.
So some of the things you mentioned there that have been a little bit they've worked until they haven't. Here's a thought. Are we headed toward an environment where real-time payments will replace all batch payments? Or you mentioned use cases, it depends on the use case. Are we headed toward a blanket future where batch payments ultimately will go away? Or might we see a coexistence with pockets of resilience for batch?
Yeah, I think it's certainly that latter case, a coexistence. I mean, if we look at the UK as a prime example, your real time has been here for quite some time. But if I look at the volumes of payments, transactions going through, say, the back scheme versus the faster payment scheme, back still has a bit of a lead. It's pretty close. And FPS, I think, is catching up year on year, but it's still kind of 60-40 in favor of batch. I think where you see a lot of the growth in the volume of the real-time payments is new use cases, and that's partially supported by just a shift in the modern world. You have more gig workers, people who want to get paid daily, weekly. They don't want to wait for a monthly cycle. Immediate payments allows you adapt to those type of use cases much more easily, without upending your existing bulk process. So, I mean, depending how far into the future you want to look, I think it is just going to be real-time payments increasing their market share year on year on year. But there'll be a long tail, I think. And part of that, I suppose, is the perceived challenges of making the shift in your infrastructure and processes to a real-time world. And that'd be at the corporate level and at the banking level. As consumers, we're getting far more used to immediate everything. And again, I mentioned the UK where I'm based. I can send money on my mobile phone in my app, effectively real-time settlement through the banks to anyone else who holds an account in the UK. So I'm used to that. The corporate world's a little further behind because to unpick what they have, they maybe quite don't see the full benefit to do that yet.
With the duality of the banks and the corporates having to make the shift, is there a mindset shift that needs to occur when grappling with technology? Is there a hesitancy that you think might be out there? Is it because of a technological challenge? Or even a worry that, hey, how do we begin? What do we start to embrace to get there?
I think there's a perceived hurdle on the initial change that would need to happen. And as a senior payments figure at one of the main US banks said to me recently, the real-time payment connecting into the scheme isn't really the difficult bit. The work is the upstream to that point. So if you're used to batch processing, you have your 1 or 3 day cycle, you have your bulk debits at your bank. Moving to a 24/7 always on world can seem daunting, absolutely. So it's not just the question of technically how do I connect into a new API based system, for example, but how do I keep my processes like banks would shut their books at 11 p.m. every night to clear everything up for the day, and then they start off fresh the next day. But what happens if money is still coming in? Money coming in at 2 a.m. on a Sunday morning through a real-time payment system. How do you adapt to that? And the various schemes have rules and requirements around giving use of funds to customers. So it's not just your books and records, it's actually pushing that up through the channels to your retail customers, your corporate customers. So I can see how that would seem quite daunting. I think that kind of the change in mindset that you allude to is one that needs to be a little more medium-term benefit. So a little bit of upfront pain, if you like, that you may not see the benefit day one, but it is actually teeing you up for a much better future and future-proof, as the world just continues to move into this real-time processing world. You are future-proofing yourself against future developments, future enhancements, etc. I think a lot of organizations, they're always swamped with mandatory change from regulators, new products they want to get out. So it can be harder to take a medium to longer term view on spend some money on change now because you won't necessarily see the benefits immediately. But actually this type of change, I think, requires that slightly longer term view.
You have two concepts in there I want to delve into a little bit because it leaves room for discussion of APIs. It's the idea of future-proofing, the idea of connectivity, and maybe streamlining some of these transitions we've been talking about. Where do APIs fit in with this idea and execution? And more than that, what is the single API approach and why is it an optimal one in your mind?
Yeah. So, I've worked in banks in my career before. I was at Form 3, more in the kind of the high value payments and the batch payments. And I've seen file, FTP transfer, various ways of sharing information. And I thought, when I came into the API world, that's just another way to send data. And I didn't appreciate till a bit more recently the flexibility that they give you, both in terms of speed to try things out, connect to something, try it out. We've had customers who have connected to us within a day. I've never seen a file connection get set up that quickly ever. So there's that kind of ability to try things at a much lower cost, proof of concept pilot, whatever you want to call it. That's one thing, but also the flexibility to do more with that data. So being able to integrate with APIs across all the multiple systems you may have in your banking world. You'll have a ledger, you'll have an investigation system, you have a customer service system. They can all be fed independently from a set of APIs that give the right information to those who need it, rather than having to take a single source, trying to filter it out, or trying to get training your people to ignore the bits they don't need to see. You just send them the bits they do need to see that help them. It also gives you that kind of decoupling from some of your more core systems as well. So anytime you want to make a change, you're not going through months of regression testing. I've been in institutions where maybe they could get 1 or 2 change cycles in a year, because the amount of regression testing they needed to do, because they're worried about unexpected knock-on consequences, is huge. And those those change cycles are always oversubscribed, and it really just slows down the pace of change, and ultimately of making your customers' lives better with better solutions and better products. If you then take that to the next level of kind of single API, the more simplification you can have, the easier life is going to be. You're not trying to code your systems against multiple things. You're not having to worry about which market is this payment going to, because the API is handling all of that for you. And ultimately what this does is frees up your resources to focus on your customer's journey, your customer experience, where you can really differentiate yourselves against your competitors.
Is that a way of more adroitly managing R&D spend, which certainly has its own pressures now, right? In the current macro environment, every dollar counts. But I think you're alluding to the idea that if you're leveraging the API, you're freeing up some of the R&D and tech budget that would normally be backing and filling and dealing with all of these other things and change cycles you've mentioned you have to do. Now you can allocate those dollars more to the end user or end customer or other parts of the relationship. And maybe, is it fair to say, free up those dollars to be innovative rather than reactive to the changes that need to be done?
That's exactly right. What's overlooked a lot during these kind of change programs is the resulting run costs of that change as well. They frequently come out of different parts of the budget, different people responsible for them. All the things we've talked about, say in the API world, in terms of simplifying the change event, carries on into then the simplification of the ongoing run of that service as well. You have less maintenance, less overhead, and it all, as you say, ultimately frees up your dollar spend, and maybe probably these days more importantly, your people resources, to work with your sales team, your product team, to come up with more innovative solutions, either maybe catch up a little bit with your competitors if you feel you've fallen behind, or steal a march on them. There are so many new payment use cases coming out, and almost every day it seems like the buy now pay later and different ways to move your money. And consumers, I think, increasingly vote with their feet. If they see a better service somewhere else, it's quite easy now, because it's just download a separate app on your phone and you're up and running, right? So I think that customer retention piece becomes more and more challenging, and you want to be able to focus your resources on that as much as possible.
So much of what we're talking about is going to be crystallized when FedNow comes to the forefront and to, an official launch. We're only a few weeks away. So tell me a little bit about what we're discussing, the APIs, the idea of moving away from batch, the ways in which we can get some innovative use cases out there. How does all this wind up being synthesized to help banks get ready for FedNow when it launches, and then for faster payments in general, no matter where we're looking?
Mm-hmm. I think what I'd say is don't try and kind of rush into just something tactical. Don't just think I can connect to this and it is problem solved. There, as I said earlier on in the session, a lot of the work adapting to real-time payments is in the upstream. It's your cores and your channels upstream. So I think it does need a well thought through, planned, change project. I think some, connecting to an API-based service like ours allows you to get in quickly and start playing around, for want of a better word. Get your developers used to handling the data flows, and it can help inform that strategy of where do we need to start first, where do we need to put the initial effort. It means you can start bringing your operational teams in, your production support teams in quite early to see what it's going to look like. So rather than run it with a project team who then disappear and you hand it over and they're like, well, we don't really know, this looks really new, you can get everyone involved very early on, because we have full capability simulators where you can be testing actual kind of flows that you'll see in the real world from day one. As I mentioned, I think it does take a little bit of a more medium-term view. Don't expect, amazing results overnight in terms of realizing those benefits, but it means you can start talking to your customers from a position of, we have this and let's figure out how best to use it together. It means you can start marketing yourselves as well, so you're not looking like you're falling behind. And I think the other thing is, probably don't expect it to solve everything overnight as well. As I said, there are use cases where batch will stay around for quite a while. I mean, we still see checks being used, right? There are use cases for these older payment mechanisms which will take time to die down. So don't expect it to be a panacea for everything. Really just embrace the new things it will let you do and let you give to your customers.
I think that's a great point. It's more of an evolution. So I'm not expecting it to be a revolution, but it'll be an evolutionary move over the longer term. I think it's a good point. Mark, I want to thank you for the time, for the conversation.
Great speaking with you, Hal. Thank you.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.